let's get started. So, welcome everyone to my talk. And as you can see from the title slide, that's not going to be a traditional talk because it's going to include some information about avalanches, snow, mountains, and stuff like that. So for those of you who checked the description of the talk, you probably have an idea what I'm going to be talking about. But for the rest of you, the purpose of the talk is for me to share my experiences managing risk at the company I work for and making that connection to snowboarding and going in the backcountry. So dealing with risk is probably one of the most boring things you can do. But if you don't do it, it's also one of the most stressful things that you have to deal with eventually. So just to get an idea of the audience here, how many of you are actually implementing some risk management policies in your companies? Okay, about 40%. Nice. So up in the mountain, there is just one huge risk, and it's losing your life. And in our daily lives that we manage Drupal websites or a business that relies on Drupal, or in our case, many servers, when shit hits the fan, things can get really tough. So here's what happens up in the mountains. So pretty scary.
Is that you?
No, that's not me. I've had a similar accident, but not as scary as this one. So that guy was lucky. And he was lucky because the snow didn't actually cover him. Because if it covers you, you have pretty low chance of survival because you're going to be out of air in like 15 minutes. It's pretty much the same in the IT world. Of course, if you look at a video, it won't look the same. But the last time I encountered such a disaster in the IT world was in the beginning of March. And probably most of you remember that incident. So here is how it started. That's the official AWS account tweeting that S3 is down. And they're working hard to solve the issues. And after that, you got so many articles on the internet explaining how S3 went down, how half of the internet went down. And that was my favorite one. After that, I checked the report by Amazon. So what happened is that an engineer who works for the S3 team made a typo, and eventually he brought down a huge number of servers from an availability zone on the East Coast. At that moment, they realized that they should have brought down less servers, and the whole S3 service went down. So many companies lost a lot of money and credibility during that outage. So my purpose today is to actually make you think more about risk management and to scare you. And at the end of the conference next week, when you go back to your offices, to start thinking about implementing risk management for those of you who didn't raise your hand, and for the rest, how to improve these processes that you already have. So who am I? My name is Daniel Kanchev. I work for SiteGround. We're a web hosting provider. We focus on hosting Drupal websites, but Drupal is not the only part of our business. So we've been hosting many types of applications for the last 13 years. Currently, I work as the enterprise solution architect at SiteGround, and I do three things mainly: design complex hosting infrastructures for big enterprise clients, take care about the whole team, and the next thing is that we do offer consultancy in terms of IT risk management to clients, and I also do the same internally with the company. So at the end of the presentation, I don't think that any of us would be able to handle such an outage as the Amazon S3 one, but I hope that all of us will understand the risks better. So how do we get started here? Or what do we actually need to do to start implementing risk management procedures? The first thing is that I've said it's going to be more interesting, but the truth is I have to cover some basic terminology about risk management in order to get to the more interesting stuff. So up in the mountain, people are used to see those things. For the normal people, I would say most of them are, what? And for the rest of us, you get a shovel, you get a radio, you get a backpack, which actually has those things that pop up out of it. So you pull a trigger, and that backpack is designed to keep you on top of the snow. So that's how you fight risk. There are also many other things that you can do. But the thing is that if you get the basics of what risk is and how we define it, you can actually come up with a whole list of ideas how to prevent risk and how to actually fight it. So everyone who goes up in the mountain knows what those are and knows how to evaluate certain conditions and certain situations. So what exactly is risk? What's the definition? If I have to put it on a slide, then that's the one. So risk is something which is defined by the probability of something bad happening to your company, and it happens when you have a threat and a vulnerability. If either of those is not present, then you don't have risk to fight with. So, story time. Well, the story that I want to tell you is related to the Amazon S3 outage and one of our enterprise clients. So this client, they have a business where they sell plugins, modules, templates to people who use many of the popular CMSs, not just Drupal, also WordPress, Magento, and so on. So a part of their website, when you go there and purchase a module, generates a download link for you once you check out. And that download link works with Amazon S3. So their website and everything is hosted on our infrastructure, but they're generating the links and the packages that's going to be downloaded from Amazon S3. And here is what happened. So at the time, we didn't know that S3 had an outage. So we just got a call from the client. It was, is something wrong with the PHP? Did you make any changes to any modules or something? Because we are having some more complaints about people not able to download or the links are not working. And it was strange because that was only for the US East Coast. So people in Europe and also on the West Coast were not affected. So you start debugging, and 15 minutes later, you figure out that nothing's wrong on your end. So we jumped on a call with the client, and because obviously their main source of revenue is affected, and they're getting more and more orders that are pending. And I talked to their head of development, and the guy explained how everything works. And he told us, yeah, before we migrate to you guys, before you created for us your setup, we used to have downloads there. And that's some legacy code that we've been doing for the last couple of years, so we didn't touch it. So S3 was still working after they migrated to us. And at that moment, I was like, obviously, there should be something wrong. So I opened the Amazon status page, and everything's green. So yeah, S3 is working, so it's not that. The problem with the S3 outage is that the little green and red pictures that show the status of every service that Amazon uses was also hosted on S3. So pretty much, at some point, we checked Twitter, and we saw those tweets, and we figured out what the problem was. So we sat down with the client, and we explained what happened. They changed the code, started serving the downloads from our hosting infrastructure. And after that, we write down an incident report, a post-mortem for them. So the problem here was that someone assumed that Amazon S3 is going to be up forever and ever, and it will never go down. So the threat here was obviously that eventually it could experience issues, and the vulnerabilities was the design flow in the way their product was supposed to work. And I can give you many similar examples. Like, for example, the threat could be a script kiddie or a hacker that's going to be targeting an outdated Drupal module, and obviously the vulnerability is the outdated Drupal module. And those examples are pretty obvious, but some of them are not so obvious. So if you think about risk, you will probably get down to 10 or 15 things that you can figure out right now for your business, but you should have a more systematic approach how to define risk, so you know what you need to be looking for. Before I move on and tell you how you can actually do that, there is one more thing that is probably the most important thing of that presentation. And whoever answers what's the most important thing about risk management gets free beer I'm buying tonight. So any suggestions? OK, then the beer's for me. So the most important thing is the company vision, that you need to have the support of the management. So if you're a C-level executive and you agree that that's important, then good. But if you have to persuade someone in the company, then that's the most important thing. If you persuade your bosses, C-level executive, the shareholders, the owners of the company, that you have to do that, then if you do only that, you have succeeded. Otherwise, you're going to fail. Otherwise, all the work you're going to do, listing risks, evaluating what's the likelihood of happening and preventing them, you will fail. You will fail because there will always be some more important things to do. Like there will always be something else that will be the priority, like improving your development workflow or, for example, doing some marketing and sales. And you will rely on the illusion that risk is not something you need to take care of immediately. And yeah, that will never happen to me. And yeah, that risk is not going to affect me. So eventually what happens, so shit hits the fan, and something like that happens. Yeah, you're skiing down this awesome slope. Suddenly there is an avalanche, and you're lucky. You escape it. Oh, yeah. You're like, whew, that won't happen to me. But then you didn't calculate something, and something like that happens because you think you're lucky. So you go down. There is an outage with S3, for example, as I mentioned, and it hits you hard. So don't make any illusions. You're not going to escape something that could happen. I mean, if you list the risks on your end, you could be able to fight them. If you just ignore them, that sooner or later, that's going to hit you. So what was the effect of S3 going down? Those are the losses. So SP 500 companies, they lost about 150 million. US financial companies, about 160. And that outage was 2.5 hours. So for 2.5 hours, many people lost a lot of revenue and also probably credibility. So the scary thing here is that Amazon actually have a huge team that fights only risk. So they have a plan what to do with something like that happens. And despite the fact that they have such a huge team, almost as big as some of the companies that are here at DrupalCon, shows us that what will possibly happen if you don't even have such a plan, what to do. Well, one of the things that could go wrong is that your site could be down for a long period of time, or, for example, a past employee that you had could break in and steal some of your financial information, and your business could die in a day. So the first thing that you have to do is think about risk categorization. And there are two main groups of risk. So you have internal risk and external. And when I'm talking about internal risks, think of those risks as the ones that you have total control over. And you can actually do everything on your end to protect yourself. So the risks here are mainly related to what happens when a company grows. So you started your own business, it was just you and somebody else, and 2 years later, it's a team of 15 people, or even better, 100. So at that moment, you have to start thinking who has access to what. You need to implement access control layers in your organization, because if a junior developer is able to deploy to production, you have a problem. The same goes if someone from the design team has access to a shared folder or something where you're keeping financial information about the whole company. So those are some things that you can identify within your own organization, and you can work towards resolving them. You don't rely on anybody else, except, for example, some software vendors that provide tools that you're using to manage everything internally in your company. But generally speaking, those are the risks that you can control. So you can implement procedures and see if they're working. And it's important to list those on your end. It's important because when you hire new people or someone gets fired, you have to follow a procedure and deny all the access they used to have, or walk the new person through a training, and that training will give them information about what are their responsibilities, what data they should have access to, and also inform them that the management of the company actually cares about risk management. External risks, those are the ones that you will have the hard time finding and actually fighting, because you rely on somebody else. An example is if you have an e-commerce application and it uses just one remote payment processor. What happens if this payment processor goes down? Do you have a backup? Is your Drupal application able to switch automatically to the other payment processor? Because if it's down for 3 hours and you're losing sales during Black Friday, then you will be losing a lot of money. So external risks are the ones that are more difficult. And usually you have to discuss them with other companies, such as your hosting provider, or, for example, the agency that created the website for you. And I'm going to talk about both. So how do you start and identify both of those risks? The truth is that that's a long process, and it's going to take time. But the first thing you can do is start some internal conversations in your company. So when you go back to the office, start talking to people. And you have 3 main groups of people that you want to be talking to. The first one is, of course, the management again. And first, you have to talk to them, so they will be able to give you the vision of the company and what are the most important things for it. So, for example, let's say, again, the example with the e-commerce store, people tell you, yeah, the most important thing is for the checkout to be available at any time, and for the products to be there to see which product is available, which is not, stuff like that. So integrity of the data in the database, and also availability of the website. After that, you have to talk to team leaders or people that actually lead the different departments in your company. And why is that? They are the people who have the bigger picture, but also have many details about what's going on in a certain department. Because in certain departments, you have different risks. So talking about development, as I've mentioned, the junior developer deploying to production, or someone having access to information that's not supposed to be shared. So those guys will be able to tell you what's going on inside the company. And last but not least, talk to at least 1 or 2 people from every department. Ask them what is their daily duties, the daily job they're having. Because that way, you're really going to find those hidden risks that will come back at you at some point. Like, one example we had is that we have a big office where our headquarters is, and it's about 200 people in the office right now. So the office managers are responsible for getting people from ground floor and getting up to where job interviews are held. So we forgot to actually talk to the office managers and tell them about risk management and who should come in, who should not. And on a day when we had like 15, 20 interviews, 2 guys pretended that they have a scheduled interview for a job with us, and their purpose was actually to rob the place, to take a look around and see what's going on, and after that, get some of the hardware in there, because you know there are some pretty expensive things. So that's a simple example. Another example is what happens if you have a remote employee who's accessing information through insecure networks and they're not using a virtual private network. So those things you will be able to find out once you talk to those people. And at that moment, you're going to have a list of not all of the risks, but some of them. And that will give you an idea how to get started and go through each and every one of the risks. So in order to make a recap at that first section of the presentation, I would say that the most important things are you have to get the basic terminology and tools. So when you start the conversations, you know that the people you're talking to, they know what you're talking to about. So they know what's risk, they know how it's defined, they know that the company cares about it, because the management vision about it is also important. So yeah, if the bosses, they don't care about security, probably there is absolutely no point of doing that. Start the internal conversations, talk to people, and list those risks in a table. Make it internal, external risks, and try to list them. Of course, you will miss many of them, but that's not a one-time process. So you have to go over and over and over, like every 6 months, for example. So you will be able to identify more and more. So once you have those risks listed, it all goes down to, okay, so which are the ones I need to care about? Which are the ones I can actually delegate to another company or get insurance? Or for example, if we're talking about uptime of a website, what's the SLA that the hosting provider is giving us? So the second section is risk evaluation. I'm going to try to give you a sample framework that we've created. And that sample framework works for about 98% of the things. And I would say that it's valid for pretty much any business. If you're a developer, designer agency, or you're just running one Drupal website or a university, it applies no matter what. But again, let me get you back to avalanches and avalanche safety. So that's an international scale of how risky it is to go and snowboard and ski in the mountains. It's from 1 to 5, and pretty much you can divide that into 3 sections. Number 4 and 5 absolutely don't go to the mountain. Only mountain rescuers go at that time. And in Europe, in the Alps, you get towns evacuated if the risk is at level 5. So a huge avalanche that no one caused could actually go down and slew down the whole city, the whole town. And that happened this year in Italy with one small town. So if you go at the other end of the scale, you see low risk and moderate, which pretty much means that nothing is going to happen unless you go to a slope where there is history of events, where you know that many avalanches fall, and you cause the avalanche yourself, because you have no idea what you're doing and you can't evaluate the situation. So the one level, level 3, which is the worst one, requires knowledge about how to evaluate if it's risky enough to ski and to go there. And here's some statistics about the percentage of fatalities from 1993 to nowadays up in the mountains. And as you can see, people are not so stupid, and they don't go out in the mountain when the level is 4 or 5. And also, if you combine the percentage of level 1 and 2, it's still lower than level 3. So at level 3, when most fatalities happen, what happens is that people underestimate risks. They think that, yeah, those are the perfect conditions. You have enough fresh snow that you can enjoy and go and snowboard or ski. But they don't have the expertise to analyze the situation, and those are the most fatalities. It's pretty much the same situation when we talk about IT risk management. So at the top, you see the obvious risks. So everyone knows you don't need to use weak passwords, or you have to enable two-factor authentication. You need to have backups of your websites. So people know those. They're obvious, and they're usually protected against them. On the lower end, you have the low impact risks. So those are the ones you can accept. And you can say, yeah, that's something I don't care about, or I can just delegate that to somebody else. Like, for example, let's say you have a block and you don't really care about how often you backup that block, because you can backup it once a week. And if it goes down and something happens and it's deleted, you will be back 1 week before that. But if it doesn't drive a lot of users to your important websites, then you can accept that risk and you can say, I don't care. The problem is with the underestimated risks. What happens there is that, first of all, people do not try to list those, as I explained that we should do. And after that, they don't try to evaluate them the way they should be evaluated. So if you have a list of 40, 50 risks there, and you don't go through the second process, which is evaluation, then you are not getting any work done in reality. So what are the factors that help us evaluate conditions and risk in the mountain? So there are 4: weather, terrain, human factor, and snowpack. And when you go up in the mountain, you should be informed about what's going on. So if you had like 15 inches of fresh powder, that's one thing that you should consider, because there is too much new snow. So I can trigger an avalanche because of that. Or am I going to snowboard a really steep slope, which is more risky? Or I'm going to the resort and I'm just going to hit the slopes that are groomed and everything's fine there. Also a human factor. So if you have a group of 5 people going somewhere in the backcountry, one of the rules is that people have to travel from at least 100 meters from each other. Because if you have 5 people at one place, you have too much weight on the snowpack and they can just trigger an avalanche. So again, how people behave is something that is important to evaluate the risks. In IT risk management, you have something similar. So first you have to figure out how important are for you the assets that could be affected by those risks. So if you're dealing with medical records and you have to be HIPAA compliant, then if something allows an attacker to make an SQL injection, that's pretty critical, because the data you have there in the database will be affected. You also have to figure out a way what will be the impact of this risk being realized. And to be honest, those are the most difficult things. So it's not going to be easy, and I can't really tell you that's step number 1, step number 2. I'm just going to give you guidance. But those are the things that you have to understand that evaluate each and every risk. So what will be the cost to protect yourself? Yeah, if aliens invade the Earth, then it will be a huge problem, but I don't care that my website is going down. So it depends on the costs as well. You have to educate your stuff about that, and you have to know that every developer, for example, when they're developing a new functionality, they're considering many of those things that you have listed in your IT risk management procedures. And one important thing is that you have to keep history of attacks and incidents. When something happens, try to figure out what went wrong, try to analyze your own actions, and after that, learn from those mistakes. So still, I'm going to give some steps that you can follow. And the first is the valuation of your assets. And there are 2 ways to do it. One of them is quantitative analysis. The other thing is qualitative. And they can't really be applied for everything. So for example, quantitative analysis is applied for assets that you know their cost. If you're managing servers at AWS or you have your own hardware, then it's easy. You make a table, you list every asset, and that's the price I'm paying. So if a hard disk goes down, then I know what's the price for that. I need to replace it. I need to have parts, spare parts that I can use in order to bring the server up and running. So that's the easy part. The qualitative analysis includes evaluating the things that you can't measure easily. But here's an example. So let's say that you are an agency and you have this one client, which you make about 10K per year. However, this client is referring many new clients, and he's constantly writing on social media how great your service is. So how can you measure that? If you can come up with some formula to figure out how many new clients you've got from this specific client, then good. You can put it in the quantitative analysis. But if you can't, then that's something you have to consider. And there is no way to come up with a number. I cannot tell you that, yeah, that's 100% something important. You have to figure it out for yourself. But the idea is that during the conversations that I mentioned, you will get enough information about the things that can't really be measured, and you can discuss them internally in your company. A great example I can give you is our internal knowledge base. It's a very simple website that contains articles about some edge cases, something that happened, and our support team and the customer service in general were able to solve for a client. So the company right now is about 450 people, and more than 50% of our company is customer service. So you have at least 100 people online at the same time handling chats, tickets, and phone calls. And if this simple website goes down for more than 15 minutes, we see how people are trying to search for something that happened before or something that they are not aware of because, for example, they started a couple of months ago and they still don't know all of the things related to how the company functions. So if that website goes down, then we have a problem. And that's a perfect example of how we can't really measure in terms of money what's the price of that website, but we know that it's mission critical. So try to list those and put them in those two categories. And try to do both. Don't limit yourself with the first one, because the first one is probably the one that's going to give you the support of the management because they want to see numbers and the financial department. But the second one is the one that's going to give you more information about what's really important for the company. And you can have assets that could be evaluated in both ways. So step 2 is what happens if a risk is realized, or impact analysis. And there are 3-4 things to look out for. So the first thing is to figure out timing, or identify the point in time when interruption of service would have great impact, like Black Friday for an e-commerce site, or the Christmas holiday season. After that, define the exact operations impact. Like checkout is down, we're going to be losing sales. And you can pretty much see historically what will be the loss. So here I've just typed 10,000 bucks per hour if you have a huge website that sells so many things. And move on to the next realized risk. So what if the website is up and running, but at the same time your CRM is down, and you can say, yeah, if it's going to be down for more than 2 hours, then I'm going to be affected. Because after that, I can catch up with things and handle pending orders. And again, try to somehow put a number there in the last column. I know it's hard, but experience is the only way to do it. And of course, website is hacked, for example, customer data is exposed, and as I've mentioned, you could be saving medical data, or you could be saving credit card details. And if that is an incident that is public, then you could be facing huge fines. And that could actually bring down your whole business. So that's one very important thing to consider. The third step from that procedure is to determine the likelihood of the risk. And this is based on the previous 2 steps. So once you know what's the price of the asset you're protecting, once you figure out the numbers that you're going to put in that table I showed you, you will be able to come up with a number between 0 and 100. And that will be in percentage. That will be percent. So if it's close to 100, yeah, it's going to happen for sure. If it's below 50, that's my general rule of thumb. I don't care if it's less impact, if it's not something that's going to cost you a lot of money. So on the left, that's the things that should be considered for avalanche safety. On the right, you see IT risk management. And those 4 things that you see here are also important. I haven't talked about them so far, but the threat usually has certain capacity and motivation. If you fired someone that was, for example, a lead developer or something, and that guy has a pretty big motivation to come back at you, then that's something you need to consider. And what I do is I try to figure out if you have more than 2 available. So if you have high motivation of the threat source, and you also have current controls that are not going to save you, then you should be worried. If it's just one of those things, then probably you're on the safe side. So another video here, that's a test that people perform in order to see if the snowpack is stable. So the test is you go over that area, you lean down just to see if your weight is going to put the snow down, and after that you jump. And you will see here how you have a huge slab that actually went down the hill. So why I'm showing you that? It takes about 2.5 to 3 hours for 4 people to dig out the hole that you see there, and they actually have to cut out the snow at the sides and at the back of that area so they can perform the test. And they do that only to be able to go down that single slope. And going down that single slope takes about 35, 45 seconds. If you're lucky, you have 1 minute to enjoy the fresh powder. But you have to dedicate 3 hours in order to make the test. So yeah, it's a time-consuming process. It won't happen immediately. So all the things that I mentioned, you're going to be doing them, you're going to be iterating over and over again, but they pay off. And here's a simple example. I mean, it's obvious example, but it shows what you can do. So let's say you have a latest Drupal 8 website, you have a custom module, and you're using a third-party library that is hosted on GitHub. And that library got vulnerable at some point. So after that, your module, you're implementing new features, it works, it's the latest stable version, your own latest stable version, but the library is still old, so that means you have a vulnerability. So here's what you can do and follow. First, you get your system design. In that case, that's the website with that module and the library. The first question you need to ask yourself is that system vulnerable? In our case, as I've said, the moment it got vulnerable is when the library got outdated. If it's not vulnerable, you're on the safe side. If it's vulnerable, you have to ask yourself, is it exploitable? Because you may have a vulnerability, but at the same time, no one would be able to exploit it if it's not public or if you have a way of protecting yourself about it. Again, if the answer is no, you're on the safe side. If yes, then you have a problem with the whole system design here. And this is the vulnerability. If you add a threat to it, you have a risk. So at the moment, you figure out that there is a public exploit for that library that you're using. And for example, there is a proof of concept script that I can just download and run against your website. And I can take full control, for example. So again, you have to ask yourself 2 questions. The first one is, how expensive it's for the attacker to exploit that vulnerability, and what will be the gain of the attacker? So if the attacker's cost is lower than the gain, then probably no one's going to try to exploit you just because it's fun, and they're not going to dedicate 1 week of their life to do it. And the next question is, what's the anticipated loss? So if you project that someone's going to have full access to your website, then you're not on the safe side, and you have a risk that's unacceptable. In all other situations, the risk is acceptable, or there is no risk, and you can safely disregard that. And I know that the example I gave is pretty obvious, but that works for pretty much all the risks that you're going to list in your table. So in order to provide a recap for that risk evaluation, know the risk levels or define your own. I mean, if 5 levels is not enough or it's too much for you, create your own framework and work out with those risks. You can just list 3 of them or 4 of them as levels. Don't underestimate the risks. Always ask yourself, what if? What if that happens? What if something else happens? So consider all the factors. And I know that you won't have them all, because you don't even understand that there could be something else in the hosting infrastructure, for example. But then ask questions. Go to your vendors and ask them, OK, I'm an agency, and I've created those 100 websites for my client. And right now, I'm hosting all of them on that platform as a service. What happens if you experience issues? Are all of those websites going to be down? So when you ask questions, you're going to get a better idea. And try to determine the likelihood and the impact of those risks. I know it's difficult, but you will get better and better doing that every day. The last section of the presentation, guys, is how to actually avoid risks, how to perform trainings at your company, and what happens if an incident occurs. And again, story time. So I thought, like 2 years ago, that we're doing everything the way it's supposed to be done. So we have those risk management procedures, and we have listed all the risks, and we have identified which risk goes into which level, stuff like that. And it turned out that when something happens, that doesn't help at all. So you actually haven't done anything so far. You just have a document sitting somewhere in a shared folder. The management of the company is happy. Yeah, we're dealing with risk. But in reality, you haven't tested that. And you don't know what's going to happen. So I went to that Avalanche safety course 2 years ago. And during the course, first, we were taught about the theory behind avalanches, but that was like a couple of hours. And after that, for 2 days, we went backcountry. We started analyzing the snowpack, the weather conditions. We simulated people that are buried under the snow, so we tried to dig them out. And we had to find a way to transport injured people. And that got me thinking. And when I went back to the office, I was like, we have to do the same. We have to simulate those risks being realized. Because if we don't do that, you just have everything in theory, and when shit hits the fan, you have the same problem. So how do you do that? When it gets to risk avoidance, as I've said, get the basics, get the gear, get the training, and try to find as much information as possible. There are different standards out there. In the US, I think the name of the risk management standard is SP 800 by NIST. And once you get that, start making training sessions. You don't need to be experts. But one of the things that you can do, for example, is, and we actually do the same when we hire new people that pick up the phone for clients or handle chats, is train them, if we're talking about IT security, about social engineering, for example, because you don't know their background, and you can assume, yeah, it's logical not to provide some information over the phone, but that may not be the case. So record training sessions and reuse those recordings when hiring new people. Create those procedures that I mentioned that will help you to go through all of the steps that you need to go to, for example, when someone's leaving the company, like deleting all the SSH keys or all the accounts. And you have to streamline that process. Because if you don't, you will have the human factor affect you, because you're going to forget one of the steps. So incident handling, about that, you have to simulate risks. So don't only assume that you will be protected and you will know the basics, but also try to make things worse in a controlled way, in a QA environment, for example, and see what happens. See how your team is going to react. Analyze your actions and write reports. So that's a screenshot from one of my favorite movies. Anyone recognizes it? Yay. Yeah, that's so popular in the US. I mean, when I ask this question in Europe, everyone is. OK, so it's one of my favorite movies because of the reasons. It shows a lot of what I talked about in practice and how that's important. And also, it's back from a time when those war rooms were used to cause harm during wars, but we can reuse this idea and apply it to risk management and handling those incidents. So the first guys that actually had this idea and transferred it to IT risk management are Netflix. So what Netflix are doing is they gather their development team, their system administrators, the people that manage the infrastructure, they put them in a team and they form two teams, the blue team and the red team, or the defense and offense. So what they're trying to do is they set up QA environments, or they even sometimes do it on the live production environments, but don't do that. Try first to do it on QA. So the first team is trying to break up things on purpose. So they just go and kill a server, or kill the MySQL instance, or shut down the firewall, and see what happens. And the other team is trying to resolve those issues real time. So once you do that, you're going to have a pretty good idea how you can react when something happens in real life. So let's say that you're talking about availability. So what happens if the MySQL master here dies? How much time do I need to switch over? And is that automatic process? So your developers will get pretty creative when you come to that things. Because right now they're busy building new things and developing new features for your clients, or for example, the DevOps team, if you have one, they're pretty busy expanding the infrastructure and stuff like that. But if you give them that specific task to actually break things on your end, then they will get pretty creative how to do it. And after that, since they have done it, they will analyze their own actions and come up with countermeasures. So to recap that, I would say that everyone should be informed about the risk management procedures in the company. And you have to tell people that's important for the company because they will feel part of the whole process. If they see something in their daily work, they will go to their manager and tell them, yeah, but I see a risk here, so can we talk about that? And the manager will be, yeah, of course, let's go to the guys who are responsible for writing the procedures. And again, it's pretty much the same with agile development. It's pretty much the same with all the process everyone's already using. So perform regular trainings and simulate incidents. And all of this is going to give you enough information to be able to wrap it up and make it a process. So you don't do it the way we did it. We just created the documents, and after that, we realized they're of no use. So you can close the loop. You can go over it again and again. And you don't have to do it every day. It could be 2 times a year. It's pretty much enough. Write incident reports. That's something that's very important. Because if an incident hits you, after that you have to analyze it. You have to analyze your actions and go back to the drawing board, see what's not working, what actually worked, and this way improve the things that you have in those procedures. And the one thing that came out of the experiments that Netflix did is that you have to design for failure. If you don't, then sooner or later, something's going to come at you. So Netflix have this single bot that is going randomly right now on all of their servers that are live and into production, and it's breaking things on purpose. And they have this big data that's coming from that bot, and they analyze it and see what happened when this service killed, for example, the streaming server in the European region. So their idea is that I don't care that the server is not working. I mean, I can just kill it, spin another one, and everything should be working. So try to do the same. When you're developing something, try to come up with ways that everything will continue to work as expected. And in order to do that, you have to know the risks. You have to pay attention to that. And that's the end of my presentation. So it's time for questions. But before I answer them, I now want to remind you about the contribution sprint on Friday. So join the people there, work together with them, and contribute back to Drupal. Because if we don't, then we don't have any future. Yeah, questions? Okay, guys, if you don't have any questions, go grab some coffee. And oh, you have one. Okay. Which one? Oh, yeah, yeah, I'm going to tweet. I'm going to tweet the presentation. What's the other question? Well, I would say that you don't have to create two separate ones. You need one, and after that, if you believe that a certain risk is going to cause a lot of trouble, you can just go into more details in there. So you can say, yeah, that's a problem with the files here, and that's going to affect this service and this service and this service. And for the database, usually you can work it in the following way. So you figure out in that specific database what data you have there. And you can work it in a different way. Yeah. So yeah, so once you go through the data that you have there, you have to find out which of the data is critical, like mission critical for you. And you can have different policy only for that data. So you can also separate it. For example, you can move it out of this database, and after that you can have different controls for that specific data. Does that answer the question? Yep.
And so, you know, if the production goes down, you know, I can access through the FTP to handle that, you know, but if it's like a bad script or something or a bad code or whatever, but if the database goes down, then I'm stuck. I can't do anything. I don't have access to that because I don't have an SSE. So that's why I'm trying to figure out if, you know, you should make two plans for two different continents.
Yeah, I get it. So it depends on the organization. If you guys have database administrators, then the process would be pretty easy for you. But if you don't, then you have other risks that should be considered because you will be one of the people that will be dealing with those risks. Because if you have database administrators, then that should be a separate risk management for their department. So if you want, we can talk about it more.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, guys, if we don't have any other questions, thank you for your time and for being here, and enjoy the rest of the conference.